Grow, change, or get a job in a bank is my recommendation to creatives or to anybody in the world who doesn't necessarily want to work at the bank. And I say that because for me the next phase is that I'm needing to adjust because I'm wanting to get out of weddings or at least have more control over where I shoot, how many I shoot. I have 2 small children, I have a husband in graduate school, I want to stay home more. So again, as a business owner, I'm now being sort of whipped around by my business, and it's important to kind of regain a life. So I'm doing more kids. Very, very, very flooded market because there's a lot of moms that said, you know, I've got a digital Rebel, I get a Blue Domain website for $100, I've got all my friends from our play group, they'll pay me $100 each. Hey, I've got a business. And they're good. And some of them really do come out of nowhere. But it's hard for people who have some training. Anyways, to do some of these. I'm teaching a workshop tomorrow to these very women who are just learning photography. And so this is some of my stuff, just talking about the data that came out of the camera, talking about lenses and stuff. Cute little yummy babies. But I don't have a studio. I shoot everything on location. This is in the window of their house with the mom's shoulder. Like that. This baby had a really funny expression. It was on my blog for a little while, and she was like, had this kind of mean expression, and the blog post was called "Baby Anya's Badass," and I got a lot of fun comments on it. So Baby Hunter. So I think the thing that keeps me kind of, I'm always vacillated back and forth between, do I want to shoot like important, depressing, or stories that are meaningful and socially important, or do I just want to celebrate life and silliness and humor? And I never quite know the answer, but I do enjoy this part of it because it cheers me up. I did not put this baby in front of this dog. I actually don't really care for newborn pictures that like sort of in Getty's-ish where they hang them from stuff, and it kind of scares me a little bit. But the dad was like, "Can I put the baby next to the dog?" And I was like, "Oh yeah." So I was really happy, and then I went back and there's the baby a couple months later. A dog, what a patient dog. All the greyhounds are just. The dog deserves an Oscar. So I'm doing, starting to shoot slightly older kids. I like that I can direct traffic a little bit more. They have more personality. I can dress them up and take them to farms and stuff. It's just, I just need to keep it interesting, or I won't want to do it anymore. Copyright questions. I'll go through this really quickly. This is a document that I'm going to send so that you guys can have access to it. But it's what I give to clients who, just so they don't photocopy pictures, basically. Who owns it? And the main question, why is all the fuss? And what we photographers are saying is, well, we are trying to make a living, and we also don't want people making bad pictures that have our name on it, like taking to Costco and get just bad contrast, bad color. That we send them to really good labs, and we have a lot of creative control because the product doesn't stop once it gets to the camera. The idea is that the whole piece is part of what you're creating. So that's basically what it says. You own the pictures, but you don't own the copyright. How can I get copies made? Well, come to us and we'll make them for you. But if you bought the digital files, which is a very controversial thing, then you can have them printed at a lab that I recommend. But I was thinking about some of those images I took to show you Cartier-Bresson. Like I just went on and was like, save as, put it into my, So I'm not really obeying the law. What? It's fair use. What's that? Educational use. You're right. But my dad, bless his heart, he's like, anyway, he didn't understand all this, and he was like, well, I was just going to take it for friends. Yeah, it doesn't, people just don't really understand the value of it. So. Anyway, on that next sort of subject to that is one of the other avenues that I'm doing is moving into stock, because I've been shooting for so long now that I have images that can be reused by other groups, whatever. So this is Wedding Paper Divas. They create invitations. This is not one of my images, but they just bought a bunch of images to use for their website to show examples of their card designs. But of course, I have to go back to the brides and get them to sign a model release and say, are you okay with this? And these are the images that she just chose. This is the woman who was the hottie in the sunshine here. That was their engagement session. There with her cream. She's really beautiful. And here's the part where you guys are going to really hate me. This is my current website, which was the custom designed. One of the things I had to really realize was that I was asking myself the question you're always supposed to ask yourself: who's your target market? Who's your target market? What it helps you figure out what's your target, what's your font going to look like, who are you talking to? And so I really thought women. Long story short, I kind of designed it for a client that isn't a real person. And as I've gotten more confident, I've decided I want to just design what I want to do. And so I got some quotes, and the going rate, which is a good thing for you guys, is about $2,500 to do a logo, and another $3,500 to do collateral, you know, all the cards and everything like that. So didn't really have that lying around, and I sort of knew what I wanted, and up until now, by the way, I designed that logo because, as I say, I need to step away from the text tool because I'm just dangerous with it. I'm just like anybody else, like, oh, I can design this, yeah, right. It's okay, it's fine. I sort of knew what I wanted, but I'm ready to do something else. So I did the thing that's evil, which is I went to 99 Designs, and I gather that you guys had a class about crowdsourcing and contests.
We've talked about it a little bit. They will revisit it. Okay,
does crowdsourcing, do you know what it means? It means that I say, hi, I'm going to pay $300. Whoever can get a design that I like gets to keep that $300, but everybody else is going to do it and not get paid. So I understand. If it were me, I'd be really annoyed with it. As a consumer, I think it's the wave of the future, unfortunately. It's certainly a good place for starting out designers, and again, I didn't need a ton of stuff. I needed an icon. I need somebody who could design me an icon, who could understand what I wanted. And so my big job was to write a brief, which is the first step of doing this. So I wrote this brief. The way this works is you basically come up with a price. The more you want to spend on your logo, the better the designer is who's going to bid on it. And you have this whole, you can look through and be like, ooh, that looks like an interesting job. And so you can just go through and pick out jobs and start winning them at the better you get. But mine said, my little selling thing said, photographer needs a facelift. That was my little sell copy. And I wrote about how I need a facelift. I'm going to start doing more teaching. I want photographers to like my logo. I don't want to be talking to brides so much as to my colleagues. Here are the fonts that I hate: Zaffino, Trajan Pro, Papyrus. I want to see film strips. I don't want to see cameras. You know, I had and they're very clear on the website when they help you write a brief. They're like, be really clear with your designer. Tell them what you want, what you don't want. So the brief's going to be a big part of your lives. And I had one guy. It was an interesting process. I had 485 entries in the course of 7 days. The contest is limited. It's a short period of time, and I basically was on the computer constantly because anytime a new one would come in, I was basically charged with rating it, giving feedback, and rejecting it or not rejecting it, and letting it sort of filter through. And so this was the final page, and that was the one design, which was designed by a guy in Italy. And you can see like the progression that started, and I would rate it. So, but this is the one I chose. And it's completely different, and I'm trying to wait for my web guys to be ready to redo the new website because in this case I am completely dependent on designers, but they're going to take this concept and build something around it for the blog. And then this is a little Blue Domain website that I'm creating. It's just going to be like my gallery website. But again, the yellow is a color I wouldn't have thought of, but I like it. It's clean and fresh. I got very lucky. I entered this contest and I made it to the finalists, which I'm really excited about. I won't know who won until April when they put the winning image out there, but I'd be shocked if I won. I'm just really happy to be nominated. I really am. I was so psyched. And this is the image that they chose. this is my little girl. You can see how I'm sort of copying Sally Mae. I don't like weird, creepy pictures of kids with like weird baby dolls and stuff. This is already my son. I just sort of end on this just because, you know, this is sort of what everything's all about these days for me. Nothing will interfere with your creative life more than having kids. They're great and it's so awesome, but it's hard work. It's definitely hard work. So do what you love and the money will follow. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. What questions do you guys have, or what's coming up for you?
You talked about when you started your 9-to-5 job, the steep learning curve of working with a team and managing some projects. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I had absolutely no experience in editorial. I had been a freelance writer, you know, written in my journal, and I'd written a couple of book stories, and so I wasn't bringing a lot to that team. I just was willing to learn, and so it was a great thing. These were very experienced editors who were pulling stories together very quickly. Very experienced art director who won a lot of awards, and being the junior person on that team was very, very helpful. I just think it was really good, and I've always been a believer in having like a B job, because it's terrifying to do that leap and go out into business by yourself. And, you know, and I'm also a fan of having a job that has absolutely nothing to do with what it is that you want to do. This book that I read that's very influential, I mean, was called How to Make a Living Without a Job, and it talks about, you know, following your dream and having ways of sort of extracting from whatever your day job is and having multiple revenue streams, whatever you can do that helps you bring in money, to not feel like you have to leap from, you know, your vocation to a paid version of that, because it might take a while, you know. But yeah, it was a great experience because it did teach me about story. That was helpful. One of the people we worked with was an editor who works at what was Life magazine, but Life is no longer there, and they do special publications and stuff, but he'd been doing it for years and years. And he had, I'll never forget it, he's like, oh yeah, PLTS. We were pitching some story idea. You know what we could do is blah, blah, blah. He had two things to say about that. One was PLTS, and I was like, what does that mean exactly? And he said, oh, people love that. And so we would look for stories that were PLTS, which was like, you know, human interest, tearjerker, and stuff like that. I always thought that was really helpful. And the other one was the Hey Hun factor, because we were publishing the airline magazine, so you wanted, or Hey Hun or Hey Martha, which was, you want to do a story that somebody reads and goes, Hey Hun, you have to check this out, this is really interesting. So, always looking for the Hey Hun factor. Any other thoughts or questions?
How did you get that job if you didn't have, you said you came to the table with kind of a little.
Well, I had a connection, which is how most of those things happen. My sister is an editor, and I did have a few published things, and again, I was coming in at a very junior level. I wanted to go to New York and take like a fact checker job at a magazine, and she said, you know, you're better off coming to some place like Greensboro where you can learn more before you get into that shark tank, so to speak. But I mean, I had clips, but pretty much, you know, I had an English degree. You know, it didn't pay very much. I mean, it was, they also were desperate for somebody. It was a lot of lucky timing. They needed somebody right away, and I was sort of like, well, yeah, sure. You know, I was kind of happy to do it. But, you know, I think any kind of entry-level thing like that, if you're just like, I'll, you know, whatever you need, I'm ready to do it. And I just think that's a great philosophy anyway. I like to start the day with, you know, what can I do to help today? You know, I've taught my little boy how to say that. And then he's like, can you cut me some cheese? You know, he'll say it because he knows it makes me happy. But I think if we approach other people and teams and the people we work with what can I do to make your life easier today? It's just going to help you so much. And did you have another question?
I did. I find if I'm walking around the world taking pictures that this is kind of a double question. With a digital camera, it's not as spontaneous because there's that moment of wait. And do you run into that a lot? Do you ever, with all the new technology, do you still go back to your regular film camera?
Oh, that's such a good question. Some people actually turn off the view option, because on most cameras you can, so that you're not tempted to do what's called chimping. I don't know if you've ever heard that term. Have you heard this term? Do you know where it comes from? It's from the sports photographers who were really the first pioneers of digital, and they'd shoot these amazing shots of a sporting event, and they go, ooh, ooh, check it out, ooh, look, and show each other, and it was called chimping. But chimping is a big problem because you miss stuff, and especially, oh man, you have to be really disciplined. But at the same time, you have to make sure that you got it, that your settings are right. I have this little kind of add-on that I do that's it's called the Limelight, and it's just a photo booth that I do at weddings, and it's really fun, and it's just basically a backdrop and a light, and people goof around in front of it and stuff. But I was tired, it was the end of a wedding, and I stepped away, I turned off the flash, and I went and I shot something out on the dance floor, and then I came back, and it was the caterers, and they were so awesome, and I wanted to get pictures of them. So they were like, woo, doing all this stuff. I forgot to fix my settings, and then I forgot to chimp. So the whole thing was completely blown out, and it was just a perfect example. Like, that's where I should have checked it, but moving from one, and that would have happened on film too, although I probably would have switched cameras, and therefore I would have had the right film camera and stuff. So, it can be a problem if you don't do it, and then you can totally miss stuff. There's nothing worse than being like, oh my God, and they're like, grandma will be like, oh my God, that was so cute. I was photographing a little boy the other day, and he was not smiling at all. 6-month-old was just like, and the mom's like, gosh, he's usually on so much worse. Oh, gosh, and she's tickling him and doing all this stuff, and I'm just trying to look through to see if I have anything at all. And sure enough, she's like, oh, he just laughed, and I was like, oh. So, it is easy to disconnect from life when you're there trying. It's just like checking your phone. You're like, anything that takes you out of the moment is a dangerous moment. But with digital, you also need to kind of make sure you've got your settings right. So I think you can sort of check it and then try to turn it off. But I am starting to shoot film again, and boy, it is so weird to go like, oh, whoa, there's nothing there. It's the back of the camera. So, it's an easy habit to get into and a very hard one to break. So, yeah.
If you shoot film, do you do your own darkroom work?
I don't. I used to. I certainly know how to do it, but boy, it's hard to find your chemicals now, and hard to find a place. And I actually sort of am even worse. I shoot C41 black and white film. Does anybody know what that means? That's what I just call it fake black and white film. But it came out 5 or 6 years ago, and it's film processed in color darkroom and with color chemicals, but it looks like black and white. So I can take it to master color instead of Dalmatian. I love Dalmatian, but they're really expensive.
So master color is good enough if you shoot that film? Okay.
Yeah. If I were to get really serious, there's a lab in LA called Richard Lab that everybody uses, but then I have to mail it, and then I send it back, and
So you just have them just process the film, or do you
process
have
and scan. I mean, again, it's sort of like there's a lot of controversy about this because it still has to get scanned, and then it becomes digital again.
Yeah.
But it does have a different quality. I just published or put on my blog some pictures that I shot at a wedding that were film, and I don't know if my sister was like, I wouldn't have known the difference. I mean, she's not a photographer, but she's like, I would never have known. So, I don't know. It's the jury's still out on that. Some of the hottest photographers are film shooters now. They've gone back to it. So, somebody who had a question? Somebody else did. Yeah.
I have one more. Also, the setting up a shot, because of my problem with the digital delay, I just find that easier, and but I'd like to hear you as a professional talk about kind of the taboo of doing that, or the haters in photography that would be like, oh, well, I heard you say it a couple times, well, obviously the photographer set this up with kind of disdain. What's up with that?
Well, it depends on the genre, because with wedding stuff, I think for me, the snobbery comes from this whole decisive moment worship, that we look at the real skill comes in being aware and being in the right place and being smart enough to catch it, and then smart enough to take it off of your contact sheet when you see it. That there's this whole sense of Ouija boardness. There's actually a photographer who's called himself Ouija because he was, had this ability. He actually had a police scanner. He had a police scanner. He was like, oh, I'm Ouija. Have you ever heard of this guy? He photographed horrifying crime scenes in the 30s, like mobster murders and stuff. Yeah. And I can't remember his name. You'll probably remember his name. But anyway, his whole thing was that he was like, I'm psychic, and they found out he had a police camera. He would just find out where the crimes were and then show up. But so yeah, I think I have a hard time. I think there is an art in setting things up, and there's an art in setting it up and then sitting back and letting it be. You know, I zoom with my feet a lot, which means I'm going to choose where I stand, and I'm going to choose where the light is. So, you know, there was a phase of documentary wedding photography which was actually like too honest. I'm like, I don't need to see the tampon box and the, you know, the bag from the dry cleaners and stuff. Like, so I will go into the room and I will move stuff. But if I were to post that on certain websites, or if I shot that for the New York Times, I'd be totally outed. There's a really interesting story that came up recently that has to do with digital manipulation, but a photographer did all these images that were landscapes, and they were like honest, unmanipulated, and then it turns out that he did some Photoshop to it, and they had to like recant the story. I mean, it's heavy controversy. I'm not in that world, so I don't need to worry about that, but the stuff I shoot where I have moved stuff would technically be considered manipulation. So it depends on how honest you want. You know, for me, honesty has to do with heightened reality and showing people the reality that they really see. I hope to show them the most beautiful side of themselves, the most beautiful side of the day. I'm going to edit out, you know, nobody's ever barking, nobody's ever, you know, having a fight, nobody's, you know, on the toilet. You know, I'm not showing that side of life. I'm showing the sort of, you know, romanticized version of it. Is that reality? Yeah, kind of. But I don't really want somebody coming in and shooting my life in its, you know, all its guts. I admire people who do it. I admire people who are willing to be photographed that way. But even the stuff I did in Tennessee was sort of like romanticized, harsh reality. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's something that essayists and writers on photography and on art have been talking about and not resolved for years. There's a great book of essays by Susan Sontag called On Photography that deals with a lot of this stuff. You know, what's reality, what's documentary, and all that stuff. And you know, I'm definitely more on the commercial side of things because I'm working for clients and wanting to make them happy. So I don't know if that helps. But
Yes, thank you.
I once told a teacher of mine at NYU that I didn't want to take a picture of somebody that I wouldn't want them to like. And I still remember that because she was quite critical of that concept, you know, and she was just really challenging my idea about it. But it also shows me that I just didn't really have the cojones to be that kind of tough photographer because I'm a people pleaser. I want people to like what I do. I want to make them happy. And so I don't want to take some picture that's going to make them feel like I took advantage of them. But that's just me. That's why I'm not, you know, Diane Arbus, she didn't care. You know, that's what made her an amazing artist, is that she took pictures of people that they might not have liked of themselves. But, you know, everybody's got a different style, so.
Are folks like that getting model releases signed by these people in the street? You know what I mean?
Probably.
Yep.
Nowadays, you know, everybody's so litigious that if you did take a picture like that, you know, and that was the whole drama with Steve McCurry. He didn't have a model release for her. She'd never been paid. She was just some girl in a schoolroom, and all of a sudden he's hugely famous. He's a millionaire. He's famous, blah, blah, blah. And she'd never been compensated for it. So they went back. Did I tell that story in the morning? Not here.
Good morning.
Okay. She, do you remember the Afghan girl? And of course, you know, everybody at National Geographic is like, yeah, they were just bowing, screaming like, oh my God, you know, what can we do for you? Thank you so much. You've made our career. You've made our magazine. We've sold something. You know, who knows how many people benefited from this woman's image that they really didn't have the right to use. So they were going to do everything in their power to try to make it up to her, and they were going to send her to these states, and move her here, and have her kids go to school here and everything, and just shower her with money and stuff. And she basically said the only thing she wanted to do was go to Mecca and to have them, you know, take her and her family to Mecca, which I always thought was a really humble thing to have happen. But, you know, I can imagine how awkward they felt, like, oh gosh, thank you so much for giving us your image, you know. So, I don't know, how did he handle that? So yeah, the model release thing is tough. It's, you know, if you have harsh pictures of people that you want to publish, you're going to have to go back and get their permission to use them. So, any other thoughts or questions?
What was the key thing you found the most?
definitely getting published. Not in the New York Times thing, but just being in like for wedding magazines and and also just being, just being a nice person. I know that seems like a really obvious thing, but I don't know. They say that bad feedback goes to 10 people and good feedback goes to 1. Have you ever heard that statistic? And I think it's true. I've heard people go out of their way to say to me, I got married 15 years ago, and our photographer never sent the blah, 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 whatever it is. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that poor person. But that person's having so much more fun telling that story than, yeah, my photographer was awesome. Like, end of story. That's kind of boring. So anyway, but being a good person and going out of the way so that they do remember you and how much fun you will be around or whatever is really good. But yeah, if you can get some publishing stuff out there for the kids, like maybe parent parents, see if you could do some free stuff for them and just get your name out there. But Twittering, all that stuff. It's exhausting. It's totally exhausting. Who here is Twitter savvy? One. Really? Seriously? What? You're like 20 years old.
I think everybody else is Facebook.
Oh, Facebook, okay. Well, photographers are Twitter fiends and drive me bonkers, and I always feel like I'm really not hip because I'm not Twittering. But that's the big, that's where everybody, all the photographers are. So, I want to ignore it, but I can't.
Well, can I ask a question along those lines?
Uh-huh.
I noticed on your website you do blog, and a lot of other agencies in the area also blog. I mean, it just seems to be an up-and-coming thing for a lot of creators to do. Did you journal beforehand, and was this a natural progression for you? I mean,
it's a thank you for asking that. I did forget to mention that I switched from what was a site, just like a gallery site, and then a side blog. I had like blogger.com or whatever. And I merged them to make one website that was a blog. I'm now going back to do it the other way, but that's a whole other story. But it's a big commitment. And sometimes I'm grouchy, sometimes I feel depressed. You have to be out there like happy all the time, and it's kind of exhausting. But I did journal a lot, but I really do have writer's block sometimes, and then I go for a week without, it's such pressure, because people are like, if you don't blog every day, they're all going to walk away, nobody's going to pay attention to you anymore. And no creative person hates to hear that more than anything else, like, oh, nobody's looking anymore. So I've toyed with like having an editorial calendar. I've toyed with having sort of an editor, because I can come up with the content, but actually sitting and creating is really hard. So it's sort of the jury's still out. But if you go to this Jasmine Star, I'm telling you, she's every single day, and it's like my dog, my this, my that. I'm just a little more private.
So it's not always relevant to the work you're doing. I mean, sometimes.
No, in fact, that's what I'm talking about with Jasmine Star stuff. Yeah. And there's another husband and wife team. They don't even talk about photography. They talk about going to Starbucks and this and that, because they're like, we want our clients to hire us and be our friends. And I think that's great, but it's also spawning a lot of really not interested people who are like, I'm going to put myself all over my blog, and I'm going to do this, and I'm so fascinating. And it's like we're already so narcissistic, and now it's like turning into even more narcissism. So I really struggle with it, because I'm it. So if you have a husband and wife, you can be like, oh, he's so awesome. She just did this awesome thing. Like, you can talk about each other, but to get on your own blog and be like, well, I just pick it. It just turns me off. And so, but you have to find that balance, because that's the reality of marketing now. And I can sometimes be in just the right headspace. I have to have like just the right amount of coffee, and just be cheerful enough, and sort of everything's okay. But if I'm in the wrong head, I just can't do it. So you'll see these long droughts, and then I'll pop up and be like, okay, I'm back. I can handle this today. But it is hard, and sometimes people say, oh, I want to hear that you're having a hard time, and I just don't. It's not my thing. It's just, I'm not a candidate for reality TV, so I don't like that kind of voyeurism as much. But, so it's interesting. So who here has a blog? Anybody
have a blog?
She's a Twitter and blogger.
She's a blogger.
Right, I'm impressed.
No.
But it's a hard process, because you have to produce every day, and then hope that people like it.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, guys.